The day my husband was laid to rest, I returned to the empty house and opened the mailbox. Among the remaining sympathy cards, a thick sheet slipped out. On it was my signature, neat, precise, agreeing to sell the very house I was standing in. The seller, my own daughter. But I had never once put pen to paper. I froze on the porch, the contract trembling in my hands. 30 years of memories. Every brick paid for with my husband's and my sweat and tears. Now reduced to a cold transaction on paper. And the one who carried it out wasn't some stranger, it was Chloe. The daughter I had spent countless sleepless nights raising. The one I thought would be my only support after losing him. The signature looked too real, too familiar, so much so it made me doubt myself. But when did I sign? Where in 67 years? My memory had never failed me like this. And the biggest question of all was, why would Chloe do this? When I finally carried the contract to her with trembling hands, her answer cut deeper than my husband's death ever could. I held the contract in my hands, the paper still slightly damp from my sweat. I set it down on the wooden table in the dining room, the place that had been the heart of our home for so many years. When Chloe came in, her footsteps sounded measured across the floor. The heels of her shoes clicked with a cold, steady rhythm. She placed her expensive leather handbag on a chair as if she were heading to a meeting, not coming into her own mother's house. I handed her the contract, my voice trembling. Chloe, explain this to me. What is this? She glanced at it, her look so indifferent I thought she was reading a utility bill. Then her dark red lips moved, each word clear. You must have forgotten. Dad left everything to me. You just signed to make it official. I was stunned. I had endured plenty of cruel words in my life back when I was a young nurse, yelled at by patients. And later when I cared for my husband through his illness, but never had a sentence, made me feel so small and worthless. I never signed this, I whispered, my eyes fixed on that looping signature that looked exactly like mine, though I knew I had never picked up a pen. Chloe sighed and sat down in the opposite chair, propping her chin on her hand as if she were bored. Mom, you just went through Dad's funeral. I understand signing paperwork then. You probably weren't paying attention. Anyone can forget. I looked up. Her eyes were cold under the ceiling light. They were no longer the eyes of the little girl who used to hide in my arms whenever a storm came. They belonged to a calculating woman, ready to erase the past for profit. In the quiet room, only the ticking of the wall clock remained. I could feel my heart pounding, as if it wanted to leap out of my chest. Chloe, this is my home. The house your father and I spent our lives building. How could you, Mom? She cut me off, her tone calm to the point of cruelty. You can still live here, but it has to be in my name. That's the only way to make everything legal. Words caught in my throat. The image of the man I had just laid to rest kept replaying in my mind, him lying quietly in the polished wooden casket, my trembling hand on the lid as it closed. A lifetime of devotion, side by side. And now, just weeks later, our daughter stood before me, treating me like an outsider. I sat down and gripped the hem of my skirt to hide my shaking hands. Do you really think I'm a burden? Chloe didn't answer right away. She took out her phone, swiped the screen, then looked up at me. Her expression was unmasked, a mixture of irritation and pity. Mom, I have my own family, my own job. I can't carry everything and take care of you too. Dad's gone. Things have to change. Each word struck me like a needle. Dad's gone. Things have to change. As if my husband's death not only took a man from us, but erased my role in this family. I went numb. Memories surged like a whirlpool in my head the day I gave birth to Chloe. Her tiny hand gripping my finger, the nights I stayed awake singing softly to soothe her, the day she wore that white dress at graduation. Her eyes searching the crowd for me with pride. They all felt like film being ruthlessly rewound and cut away. Chloe stood, pulled her chair back with a harsh scrape, picked up her handbag, and looked at me one last time. Don't overthink it. It's just paperwork. It'll be better for everyone. She walked out, leaving the scent of expensive perfume in the room that used to smell simply of morning coffee and toast. The door slammed behind her. The sound echoed inside me like a verdict. I sat very still. I did not cry or gasp, only the hollowness inside my chest widened. Afternoon light poured through the window, casting the long shadow of the empty chair beside me. That chair had been my husband's place, where he read the paper and occasionally looked up to smile at me. Now there was only emptiness. And across the table, the cold image of my daughter remained burned into my eyes. In that heavy silence, I realized something even more painful than the forged signature. I had lost my daughter the moment I lost my husband. Not in the literal sense, but to a world I no longer belonged to, a world of ambition and calculation, where family ties are reduced to numbers on a sheet. I reached out and touched the contract still lying on the table. My finger traced the deceitful looping signature, and a chill ran through me. This was not just a mistake or an oversight. It was a declaration that I no longer mattered, that I was an obstacle in my daughter's path. Outside on the porch, wind from the lake stirred the curtains. In the rush of that breeze, I thought I heard my husband's gentle voice from old times. Rose, you must be strong. This house isn't just a place to live, it's the proof of our whole life. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to hold back the tears. I knew I could not let everything end with a forged piece of paper. I still had promises to keep. I still had the truth to uncover. And above all, there was something I had to take back, not just for myself, but for this family. I opened my eyes, and the familiar living room suddenly felt foreign. The family photos on the wall were still there, me and my husband on our trip to Alaska, Chloe's radiant smile on her college graduation day, the Christmas seasons, when the whole family gathered around the glittering tree. And yet now, all of them seemed like silent frames, reminders of a family fractured from within. I couldn't stay frozen forever. Inside me rose a strange resolve. I had to find someone who could give me answers. And only one name came to mind: Walter. Walter had been our longtime neighbor, and my husband's closest friend. The two of them would sit for hours in the garage, fixing up old cars or debating baseball scores. I had often seen my husband laugh with Walter, a deep, hearty laugh he rarely shared with anyone outside the family. If anyone knew what my husband had kept hidden, it would be him. That afternoon, I pulled on a gray sweater and walked across the small street to Walter's house. His porch still held the old swing that creaked in the wind. When Walter opened the door, surprise flickered in his eyes before softening, as if he had been expecting me. "Rose, I'm so sorry for your loss." His voice was low, a little rough, like it carried the dust of years. "I've been meaning to come by, but I thought you needed time alone." I nodded slightly, trying to stay composed. "Thank you, Walter. But today, I need to talk. There are things I can't rest easy about." He stepped aside and led me to the wooden table in his kitchen, where the faint scent of coffee lingered. That warmth nearly broke me into tears, but I held them back. I pulled the contract from my purse, the one that had torn my piece apart, and set it on the table, meeting his eyes. "Look at this. You know me." "Walter, I never signed this, but Chloe insists I did." Walter lifted his glasses and read every line with care, his brows furrowed, fingers tapping the table. "The signature is identical. Rose, very hard to tell real from fake." I clasped my hands, dreading his next words. "But you believe me, don't you? I would never do this, never sell the home Dante and I built with our whole lives." He looked up, his gaze thoughtful. "I believe you. Rose," Dante used to say, "if there was one certainty in life, it was your love for this family and this house." His words steadied me for a moment, though they carried sorrow. Then his tone shifted. Lower. Probing, tell me. Rose. Do you still have the original deed to the house? I froze. It wasn't a wrong question, but the way he asked it unsettled me. I think it's still in the safe, where Dante kept it. But I haven't checked. Walter nodded slowly, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. You should. Papers like that are easy prey for the wrong hands. I stayed quiet, a chill crawling down my spine. I had come seeking comfort, but his precise concern left me uneasy, as if to break the tension. Walter suddenly said, Rose, do you remember, before he passed, Dante asked me to keep a sealed envelope. He said it was just something important to keep safe, and told me not to open it. My heart pounded. An envelope. Why did Dante never mention it to me? Walter nodded deliberately. I planned to give it to you after the funeral. But Chloe came to me. She said Dante had told her to collect it. She's his daughter. So I couldn't suspect anything. I handed it over. I clasped my hands tightly. Once again, Chloe's name surfaced, shadowing everything. I forced my voice steady. When did Chloe take it? Right after the funeral. Walter replied, eyes distant. She said she needed to settle her father's affairs quickly. A storm of questions thundered in my mind. What was in that envelope? Why hadn't Dante told me, and why did Chloe rush to claim it? I studied Walter across the table, his rough hands tightening around his coffee cup. His face stayed calm, but I felt something hidden beneath those slow nods. Taking a deep breath, I asked Walter, do you remember what the envelope looked like? He frowned, searching his memory. It was a pale yellow envelope, thick, sealed. Dante even signed across the seal. I never opened it, so I don't know what was inside. I sat in silence, my head spinning. The scattered pieces were starting to touch, but the gaps were still too wide. I knew I had to find the truth, no matter the cost. My eyes drifted to a photo hanging on Walter's kitchen wall, him and Dante standing side by side. Two men bound by a lifetime of friendship. But to me, that image suddenly felt distant, as if a once strong thread had begun to fray. I rose slowly and said softly, thank you for telling me. Walter nodded, his eyes hard to read, part sympathy, part avoidance. I left his house and stepped into the cold, gray afternoon of Seattle. The wind swept across the porch, making the old swing creak. In my mind, the questions piled one after another, pushing me forward, urging me to dig deeper into the truth that everyone else seemed intent on hiding. I walked home in silence. That day in Seattle, the sky was heavy, gray clouds drifting slowly overhead as if pressing down on my shoulders. The familiar streets still had rows of maples turning red and orange, their leaves scattered across the walkway. Yet to my eyes, the ordinary scenery seemed shrouded in gloom. I passed each house, their glowing windows radiating warmth, while my own home felt heavy and unfamiliar. When I stepped into the living room, the scent of old wood, mixed with the faint trace of Dante's cologne, still lingered. I closed the door softly, standing there for a long time, as if I could breathe in the last remnants of a past now gone. But I knew memories could not soothe everything. I needed answers. I decided to go upstairs, to the tall wooden cabinet along the east wall where Dante had always kept many of his personal things. The cabinet had faded with the years, its scratches like lifelines marking a whole lifetime. I had never opened all its drawers, part out of respect, part because I believed he had no secrets from me. But today, with trust shaken, I had no choice. I opened each drawer. Neatly folded shirts, still faint with soap, a few old ties, even a pair of worn leather gloves. I touched each item gently, as if touching Dante himself. Every object pulled a memory to the surface: mornings, when he knotted his tie in a rush to make it to work, or the wedding we attended when he slipped on gloves and held my hand tightly in the early winter cold. But when I pulled open the bottom drawer, I found something different, an old leather-bound notebook. Its edges frayed, likely written many years ago. I lifted it out, dust clinging to my fingers. A strange feeling rose in me, part anticipation, part fear. I sat on the bed and opened it. The first pages held random work notes, numbers, contact lists. But midway through, I stopped. Dante's handwriting was clear. The strokes I had seen hundreds of times throughout our marriage. Portland, Birchwood House. I frowned. Birchwood House, I had never once heard him mention it. In 45 years of marriage, every home, every investment we always discussed. But this name was completely foreign. I turned more pages. Short notes appeared: fixed porch before winter. Send key to W. And one line that made me freeze: leave it to the right person. My heart pounded. Who was W? Walter. Perhaps. Did this house truly exist? And if it did, who was the right person Dante meant? I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. Part of me wanted to believe it was just an abandoned plan, a house he once thought of buying but never did. But deep down, I knew Dante was not the kind of man to scribble nonsense. If he wrote it, it was real. The room grew heavier. I rose and went to the window, looking out at the backyard. The evening wind bent the maple trees, swirling the fallen leaves into the air. In that moment, I felt as if Dante was leaving me a message, a path he never had the chance to speak. I turned back to the bed, reopened the notebook, and read carefully. Between the scribbles, I found a small, loose sheet tucked inside. The shaky words read, "If anything happens, look in Portland. Birchwood will have the answer." I pressed my hand to my chest, breath quickening. Dante had meant to tell me this, but his illness stole the chance. Now the responsibility was mine. I sat still for a long while, the light dimming as night fell. In my mind were Chloe's cold eyes, Walter's unreadably look, and now this new secret, the Birchwood house in Portland. I knew only by going there could I piece together the scattered fragments. I closed the notebook, holding it in my hands like a treasure. Then I stood and lit the lamp, its warm glow spreading across the open drawers. In that light I saw clearly my life was about to turn down a path I could not yet foresee. That night, I barely slept. I lay on the familiar bed beside the cold emptiness where Dante used to be, my mind spinning with questions. Portland, Birchwood, those words haunted me all night, looping endlessly like a refrain. I knew I had to go there, not just to uncover Dante's secret, but to understand why everything had suddenly turned against me, from Chloe, to the forged papers, to the envelope Walter had given away. The next morning, I packed a few clothes and slipped the notebook into my bag. Even the smallest motions felt heavy, as if I were preparing for more than a few hours' drive, more like a journey into truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The road from Seattle to Portland stretched under the pale gray light of morning. Trees along the roadside dripped with dew, the damp scent of fallen maples mingling with the chill seeping in through the window crack. I drove alone, my hands trembling slightly on the wheel. Each time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw my own eyes, deep and shadowed, part determination, part fear. When the first sign for Portland appeared, my heart pounded, as if bracing to step into an entirely new life. I followed the address written in the corner of the notebook, Birchwood Lane. The narrow road was quiet, lined with old oak trees that cast deep shade. Stately houses stood behind wooden fences, their weathered roofs still carrying the dignity of time. My car slowed, then stopped in front of a 2-story red brick house with a wide porch and tall windows draped in white curtains. It stood silent, like a mute witness waiting for me to uncover what lay buried. I stepped out, my shoes crunching on the gravel path. Before I could knock, the door swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his middle years stood there, his salt and pepper hair framing sharp blue eyes that cut into me like a blade. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, guarded. I froze, clutching the strap of my bag. I'm Rose. I believe this house once belonged to my husband, Dante Thompson." The man gripped the doorframe, his eyes flashing with suspicion and anger. "So you're his legal wife?" He paused, exhaling hard. "Did you come here to fight for this house?" I went cold, his words striking me like a slap. "Fight? No, not at all. I only learned of this house after Dante passed. I found it in his notebook. I just want to understand." He was silent for a long moment, then stepped back, motioning me inside. I hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The house was spacious, warm, filled with the scent of wood and a faint trace of cinnamon. Old photographs lined the walls, and in some I recognized Dante much younger, smiling brightly, standing beside a woman I had never seen before. The man looked at me, and his eyes softened. "I'm Ethan, his son, from another relationship." The room seemed to spin around me. "His son, but Dante never..." Ethan cut me off, his voice edged with bitterness. "He never told you." "I know, but the truth doesn't disappear just because he kept silent. This is the house he bought for my mother. Years ago, after she died. I stayed here, holding on to every brick, every memory." I sat trembling in a chair, the foundations of my life collapsing around me. Ethan came closer, holding a small wooden box. He opened it and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed with age. Dante's familiar handwriting was clear across the front. "To Ethan." Ethan unfolded the letter and laid it on the table for me to read. The shaky words inside said, "Son, the Birchwood house belongs to your mother, and after her, to you. I cannot change the past, but I want to leave behind something right. If Rose comes, let her know the truth. She deserves it." Tears blurred the page. I touched the letter, feeling as if I were touching Dante's soul, so close, yet so far. Ethan watched me, suspicion still shadowing his eyes. "I don't know if you came here truly seeking answers, or if you're after claims. But if it's the truth you wanted, now you've seen it." I lifted my gaze, eyes brimming but steady. "Ethan, I want nothing but the truth. I lost my husband, and now I just need to know what he left behind for us. I didn't come to take this house." The room fell silent, broken only by the ticking of a clock. Ethan's eyes softened, his shoulders easing as though releasing a burden. But inside me, new questions stirred, pushing me to go further, deeper into the layers of secrets Dante had left behind. I placed my hand on the old letter, the trembling paper beneath my fingers as if it carried Dante's warmth back to me. My voice came out soft, choked. "Ethan, I don't want to take anything. I'm only searching for the truth." He studied me in silence for a long moment. There was still caution in his eyes, but I also saw something else, a flicker of fragility, as though he too was waiting for confirmation. Slowly, Ethan nodded. He stood, walked to the wooden cabinet against the wall, unlocked it, and pulled out an old brown envelope. "Here," he said, placing it in front of me. "My father left another letter, not just to me, but with your name on it. I never dared open it, but maybe now is the time." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten page. The ink faded but still legible. Dante's words appeared, each letter sinking into my heart. "Rose, if you have come to Birchwood, it means you have discovered what I kept hidden all my life. I was wrong to keep Ethan and my past from you. But there were things I could not say while alive, for fear of hurting you. Ethan is my son. But you are the one I trust to bring this to an end. Do what you believe is right. Rose. Forgive me if you can. I bit my lip as tears spilled, falling onto the page. The pain cut deep not only because Dante had hidden so much, but because I could feel his torment in every line. Part of him belonged to me, part to Ethan. And now he had placed both fates in my hands. I lifted my head, my voice shaking. Dante still trusted me, even while hiding the greatest truth. Ethan's gaze softened, his rough hands gripping the edge of the table. I believe so too, he said quietly. My father may have made mistakes, but he trusted you. He left the choice to you. I held the letter, reading the lines again and again, almost hearing Dante whisper in my ear, "Do what you believe is right." The words were both a comfort and a burden. Ethan sat slowly across from me. Do you know, he paused, searching for words, my mother lived here until her last day. This house was her whole life. When my father couldn't be here, I was the one who cared for her. But I always knew he never forgot her. I looked around the room, the photos on the walls, the worn belongings still intact. Part of my heart tightened with jealousy, but another part stirred with compassion. Dante had split his life in two, and though it hurt, I couldn't deny that the love he gave me was real. Just as the care he gave Ethan and his mother had been real. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice hoarse. Half of me feels betrayed, but the other half feels this late trust as a gift. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. You don't have to decide now. But if you truly came only for the truth, then you've seen it. I nodded faintly. Yet inside, I knew this wasn't the end. The letters, the messages, they had only opened the door. Behind it still lay more secrets, tied to this house, to Chloe, to Walter, and perhaps to other pages I had not yet uncovered. I closed the letter, pressing it against my chest as if to hold on to Dante's last warmth. Through my tear-dimmed eyes, I met Ethan's gaze, no longer cold, but carrying a cautious acknowledgement. In that moment, I realized what bound us wasn't just a house to resolve, but blood itself, fragile yet undeniable. Left behind by Dante. Light streamed in through the window, stretching across the wooden floor and onto the table where the two letters lay side by side. In that light, I saw pain, truth, and the last fragments of trust, all woven together, forcing me to move forward, no matter how uncertain the road ahead. I sat for a long while, letting the ticking of the wall clock echo through the room. Ethan quietly rose, as if to give me space to breathe, to find my calm again. He stepped out onto the porch, the soft creak of the door fading into silence. I was left alone with the old letters, as though the world itself had stepped back, leaving only me and Dante's memories face to face. A sudden thought struck me. If Dante had left letters for Ethan and for me, perhaps there was something else, another trace he hadn't been able to put into words. My eyes swept the birchwood room, the tall bookshelves, the antique wooden cabinet, the silent drawers that seemed to guard their secrets. I stood and walked to the cabinet against the left wall. My hand trembled slightly as I gripped the tarnished brass handle. The first drawer held only old papers, utility bills, small notebooks, nothing of importance. I pulled open the second. The smell of old paper and wood dust stung my nose. There, among the scattered files, was a thick cream-colored envelope, bound tight with a stretched-out rubber band. I carefully slipped off the band and pulled out the papers inside. On top were copies of contracts, neatly stacked, the red stamps still visible. My eyes dropped to the signature line, stopping at the bold print Thompson Residence, Seattle. My heart clenched. It was the contract for the Seattle house, the home where Dante and I had lived for nearly half a lifetime. But what struck me hardest was the signature. It was my name, neat. Familiar but not written by my hand. I collapsed into the nearest chair. Gripping the stack so tightly, my fingers went white. Every curve of the signature seemed to mock my memory, forcing me to face the truth. Someone had forged my name, had stolen my home with a pen stroke. The back door creaked softly. Ethan returned, seeing me trembling with the papers in my arms. His brow furrowed as he strode over. "What did you find?" I handed him the stack, my voice rasping. "The contract for the Seattle house, and this signature." "Ethan, it's not mine." He studied each page carefully, his eyes narrowing, deep lines furrowing his forehead. "The signature matches, but there are slips. Whoever forged this knew your handwriting very well." I swallowed hard. Chloe's image rose in my mind, my daughter. Her cold eyes the day she told me. I must have forgotten. But here in my hands was undeniable proof. "I suspected," I whispered. "But I never truly believed it could be real." My voice broke off. Ethan set the papers on the table, his rough hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Though guarded, you realize what this means, don't you? If the signature was forged, the entire contract is worthless." I lifted my tear-blurred eyes. "But why? Why would my own daughter do this?" Ethan stayed silent, only shaking his head. I knew he didn't want to pierce that wound, but in his gaze I recognized the truth for the forgery to be this precise. Chloe's hand in it ran deeper than I had ever imagined. I touched the papers, my heart swelling with a mix of anguish and relief. Anguish, because the child I had raised could betray me so completely. Relief, because at last I had proof I wasn't crazy, forgetful, or imagining things. I exhaled, whispering almost to myself, so my first shock is now confirmed. Outside, the afternoon sun dipped golden, stretching shadows across Birchwood Lane. The light streamed through the window, falling on the papers as if to expose the truth someone tried to bury. I sat staring at the cold words on the page, my chest heavy. Yet deep in my eyes, I knew I now held what I needed to move forward. Ethan stood beside me, saying nothing, only the wind in the garden, the faint rustle of leaves, and the pounding of my heart filled the silence. In that moment, I understood my journey was far from over. This forged contract was only the first piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle I had no choice but to face. No matter how much it tore me apart, I sat in silence, my eyes tracing the rigid letters printed across the papers, my heart swelling with emotions, anger mixed with hurt, but also determination. I knew I could no longer stay quiet. I had to return to Seattle, to face Chloe, the daughter I had loved all my life, and look her in the eyes to ask why. The next afternoon, I left Portland. Ethan walked me to the car, his face heavy with concern. He said only one thing: "Be careful, Rose. Whoever pushed Chloe far enough to forge your signature, they're not simple." I gave a small nod, his words landing in my chest like a heavy stone. I knew I was stepping into a storm beyond my control, but I had no other choice. By the time the car stopped in front of the house in Seattle, dusk had fallen. Faint light spilled through the window, casting shadows on the porch where I had once stood trembling with the forged contract in my hand. I drew a deep breath, clutching the bag that held the documents I had uncovered in Portland. Chloe opened the door at the sound of the bell. She wore a gray sweater, her hair tied back, her eyes cold as ice. "Mom, why are you back?" I steadied my voice. "We need to talk." "Chloe, right now." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "If this is about the house again, I think we've already talked about it." I laid the copy of the contract on the table. Explain this. Chloe, this is the real contract. I never signed a single paper. She froze for a moment, then gave a dry laugh. Oh. Mom, you must have just forgotten. You're 70 now. Your memory isn't what it used to be. I didn't forget, I said firmly, my heart pounding but my eyes locked on hers. This isn't my signature. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her voice icy. What are you implying? That I forged it? Does that even make sense? Mom, I'd have no reason to do that. I leaned toward her, my eyes red, my trembling voice burning with anger. Then who? Who else could access the documents? Who else knows my signature? For a split second, hesitation flickered in her eyes, then disappeared. Chloe shot up from her chair, her voice sharp. You've always been like this. Mom. Always doubting me. My whole life I've had to carry everything, to take care of everything. While you only ever criticized me, I rose too, gripping the papers tightly. Don't change the subject. Chloe, I'm not blaming you for anything else. I'm asking one question. Was it you who signed? The room filled with tense silence. Chloe stared at me, her eyes flashing as though fighting one last battle. Then, as if something inside her snapped, her voice broke. Yes, it was me. I went numb. My lips moved but no sound came out. Chloe burst into tears, her sobs torn between anger and despair. I had no other choice. Mom, I was drowning in debt. And Walter promised he'd save me. He forced me to forge your signature. If I didn't, I would have lost everything. She buried her face in her hands, her cries stabbing into my chest. I know, but I panicked. I was terrified you'd find out, that everything would collapse. I thought if I just signed, it would all go away. I stepped closer, pulling her into my arms, though my heart ached with pain and fury. You were wrong, Chloe. But the greatest fault lies with Walter. He used you, and the friendship he had with your father. Chloe pressed her face into my shoulder, sobbing harder. I rubbed her back, my heart torn between tenderness and steel. I knew that in this moment, I could not be only a grieving mother. I had to be the one to expose the man who had twisted our family into his control. Outside the window, Seattle rain began to fall, pattering against the porch roof, running down in streams. I looked out into the storm and whispered, as if making a vow to myself, Walter, you've been pulling the strings long enough. It's time I cut them. I knew one promise wasn't enough. I needed action. The evidence in my hands wasn't just a stack of old papers, it was the key to bringing the truth into the light. But I also understood if I didn't do it the right way, Walter would deny everything, and Chloe would remain trapped in his grip. The next morning, I walked into the office of a lawyer Ethan had recommended. The small office sat on the third floor of a red brick building, its glass door clouded with mist. The man who greeted me looked to be in his early 50s, with silver threading through his hair, sharp eyes steady with calm. He introduced himself as Samuel Reed. I set the papers on his desk, my voice trembling but clear. I need you to help me bring this truth to light. Samuel slipped on his glasses and patiently read each page. He nodded slowly, his finger tapping lightly on the desk. This is a forged signature. I can have it examined by an expert. In court, this evidence will hold. But are you ready for a public fight? Rose, I clenched my hands, remembering Chloe's cold stare, remembering Walter's probing, calculating questions. I have no other choice. The court date arrived sooner than I expected. The county courthouse stood in the center of Seattle, an old building with stone steps worn down by thousands of feet. I sat in the plaintiff's row, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Chloe sat across the room, her shoulders trembling, her eyes avoiding mine. And Walter, the man once respected by the whole neighborhood as a pillar, entered with arrogant stride. His suit immaculate. His smile forced, but still carrying a hint of confidence. When the judge entered, the air grew heavy. Samuel rose and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Rose Thompson, lost ownership of her Seattle home through a forged contract. We present the authentic copy of the contract and request signature verification." Whispers rippled through the room. I glanced at Walter. He only smirked, though a flicker of unease flashed at the corner of his eyes. The judge examined the documents closely. A handwriting expert was called to the stand. He pointed to the enlarged signatures on the screen. One genuine, one forged. The signature on the house sale contract does not match Mrs. Rose's handwriting samples. This is a forgery. The room erupted in murmurs. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. Chloe bowed her head, while Walter fought to maintain composure. He rose, his words biting. "This is absurd. I had nothing to do with it." Samuel immediately presented another set of documents. "But we have evidence showing that Walter transferred a large sum of money to Chloe Thompson right after the forged contract was signed." I turned toward my daughter. Chloe flinched, her lips trembling. Her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles whitened. Sweat glistened on her forehead. Walter shot her a glare sharp as a knife. The judge leaned toward Chloe. "Miss Thompson, do you have anything to say about this?" The entire room held its breath. I saw Chloe's shoulders shaking. She lifted her head and met my eyes. In that instant, I didn't look at her with anger but with the pain of a mother. I shook my head gently, as if to say, "Don't let him control you anymore." Tears filled Chloe's eyes. Her voice broke. "Yes, the contract was fake. I signed my mother's name. But I was forced." Walter said, "If I didn't, he would ruin me." Gasps filled the courtroom. Walter's face drained of color as he shot up from his chair. "She's lying. I only tried to help her," but the judge's gavel came down. "Calling for order," Chloe went on, her voice still trembling but stronger. "I was wrong, Mom, but I can't carry this anymore. It was Walter all along." I closed my eyes, tears spilling not from disappointment, but from relief that my daughter had finally spoken the truth. Samuel turned to the judge, his voice steady and firm. "Your Honor, this is the truth that has been hidden for too long. Walter exploited Chloe's weakness to steal property that was never his." The judge nodded, making notes, and ordered further investigation. Walter dropped back into his seat, his face pale. The title of model neighbor stripped bare in an instant. I sat there, stunned. Walter's mask had been torn away. Chloe bowed her head, her shoulders shaking, and I could only stare into the emptiness ahead of me, hurting, yet relieved. Things were not over yet. The courtroom was heavy with silence. I walked slowly toward my daughter. Chloe lifted her head, her eyes red, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong." At first, she denied it, twisted her words. But when she looked straight into my eyes, she couldn't hold it in any longer. The truth burst out. "I only wanted to be like Dad, successful, admired. But the harder I tried, the more useless I felt. I hated that feeling. Hated how you always made me feel small next to him. I clung to money to prove myself. When I fell into debt, Walter promised to help, then forced me to forge the signature. I did it. And then he controlled me." Tears streamed down her cheeks. Hearing it pierced my heart. But I also knew this truth had weighed on her for too long. I reached out, wiped her tears, and whispered, "You don't need to be anyone's copy. Chloe, you only need to be yourself. I'm here, not to judge, but to help you rise again." She buried her head against my shoulder, sobbing. I held her close, feeling the bond between mother and daughter torn, but still there. Fragile, yet unbroken. Across the room, Walter struggled to rise and defend himself. But the evidence was overwhelming: shady transfers, Chloe's testimony, the handwriting analysis. It all came crashing down on him like a verdict no one could deny. The judge struck the gavel, announcing a criminal investigation into fraud and coercion. Walter's face went pale, the chair beneath him seeming to swallow him whole. From a man once respected in the neighborhood, he became someone despised by every gaze. A few people whispered, "I never thought he hid it so well." Walter hung his head low, shoulders collapsing, his staggering shadow stretching across the tiles. He was the image of a man who had lost everything: his money, his honor, and the trust he had spent years building. I looked at him. No anger left, only emptiness. He had destroyed his own life with ambition and lies. In that moment, I understood Chloe needed me to help her become herself again. But Walter had no way back, and that was the sharp line between redemption and ruin. After the trial, Chloe and I stepped outside. Seattle was still damp from the rain, the pavement glistening with reflections from the streetlights. I held my daughter's hand cold, trembling, but for the first time in months, she didn't pull away. We walked slowly, like two people who had survived a storm and needed time for our hearts to find a steady rhythm again. In the days that followed, I let Chloe stay with me. She helped tidy the house, cooked simple meals, and sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, she would sit silently for hours by the window, her eyes red. I didn't press her. I knew there are wounds that must be left alone until the person carrying them chooses to open them. All I knew for certain was that I would be there when that moment came. But something else weighed heavily on me. Dante's letter to Ethan. The words he wrote. The message he left. Let her decide how to end it. I understood that my first trip to Portland was only the beginning. I still had one responsibility: to fulfill the wish of the man who had passed, and return the Birchwood house to where it truly belonged. One early weekday morning, I told Chloe I have to go back to Portland one more time. She looked up, worry clear in her eyes. "You're going alone," I smiled, brushing a hand gently over her hair. "This time, I need to end it myself. But when I come back, we'll start over." Chloe nodded slightly, as if she understood this wasn't just about property. It was about me keeping Dante's final promise. The road back to Portland stretched under the autumn light. Bright red maples lined both sides, the wind rustling softly through the car windows. I drove slowly, letting the scenery roll past like frames of a film, both to remember and to prepare for what was ahead. When my car stopped in front of the red brick house on Birchwood Street, I saw Ethan waiting on the steps. He wore a dark sweater, his tall frame calm, his eyes deep but steadier than the first time we met. "Rose." He nodded, his voice low. "I knew you'd come back." I stepped into the house, which had grown familiar after only a few visits. The living room was still quiet, scented with old wood and a faint trace of cinnamon from the jar on the table. On the wall, the photo of Dante and the woman from years ago still hung there, a witness to a past that could never be changed. I sat down, opened my bag, and took out the new file. The documents had been carefully prepared by Samuel, the lawyer who had stood by me. I slid them across the table toward Ethan. "This is the deed transfer. I've signed it. The house is officially yours." Ethan froze, his eyes widening before he slowly picked up the papers with trembling hands. He looked at me, disbelief etched on his face. You're really doing this? After everything that's happened?" I nodded softly, my voice calm. "This was Dante's wish. He wanted this house to belong to you. I'm only doing what he trusted me to do." Ethan clutched the file tightly, his eyes glistening. He turned away for a moment, inhaled deeply, then spoke in a hoarse voice. You've restored dignity to my father, and to me. I once thought his secret would only leave shame, but now, it's become a true legacy. I looked out the window as Portland's sunlight streamed in, catching the dust motes drifting in the air. I laid my hand over Dante's letter, still tucked in my coat pocket. This is what he wanted, and I believe, in this way, he can rest in peace. Ethan bowed his head, his voice breaking. Thank you. Rose. The room fell quiet, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. In that moment, I felt a weight lift, as though a chapter in my life had closed completely, leaving nothing unfinished. And in the warmth of that light, I could almost see Dante's gentle smile, watching over this final conversation. When I left Portland, I drove back toward Seattle in the fading afternoon light. The long road was quiet, the trees standing still, as if listening to the turmoil inside me. Everything had been set in its rightful place. The Birchwood house returned to its rightful heir, and I carried with me a rare sense of relief. But I knew something more important still lay ahead, facing my own home. Seattle greeted me with the lingering scent of rain, streaks of water on the sidewalks, and a damp chill in the wind. My old house stood there, silent yet familiar, a mute witness to everything I had just endured. I stopped the car, stood for a long moment at the steps, then finally pushed the door open. Chloe was sitting at the dining table, her face more hollow than before, her eyes cast down as if afraid to meet mine. On the table sat a steaming pot, the smell of chicken soup filling the room, the very flavor I used to make for her when she was little, now returning in this meal she had prepared. I sat down, watching quietly. At last, I spoke, my voice low but steady. Chloe, I have forgiven you, but I have not forgotten. If you want to stay in this house, you must relearn what it means to be my daughter. Chloe lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were rimmed with red, tears glistening but not yet falling. She swallowed hard and whispered, I'll try. Mom, I know I've gone too far. I nodded, offering no further reproach. The truth had been laid bare, and wounds cannot heal overnight. But at least, in her eyes, I no longer saw the cold pride of before, only a fragile need for another chance. We began the meal. The faint clink of spoons against bowls, the bubbling of hot soup, small sounds I had once taken for granted, now became proof of a new beginning. No more accusations, no more icy words. Instead, hesitant silences and clumsy attempts to mend a torn bond. Amid the smell of chicken soup, I thought of Dante. If he were still here, he would surely smile to see mother and daughter sitting together again, no longer divided. I glanced at Chloe. She was carefully serving me a portion, her hands trembling but sincere. I placed my hand on the table and said slowly, You only need to be yourself. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. In that moment, I realized the true healing had begun, not with grand promises, but with a simple, warm meal in the very home that had nearly been lost. That evening, the sunset stretched across the porch, bathing the front yard in a warm orange glow. I sat on the old wooden chair, a steaming cup of tea in my hand, quietly watching the sun sink behind the horizon. The silence was so deep, I could hear the wind threading through the trees, the wings of late birds gliding back to their nests. Chloe stepped out, a dish towel in her hand, still clumsy as she tidied the table. She paused at the porch, hesitating as if she wanted to say something but held back. I didn't press her. I knew, some words don't need to be rushed, they only need the right moment. At last, she whispered, I know I hurt you, Mom. But today, for the first time in months, I feel like I'm truly sitting in this house again, as your daughter. I looked at her. In the fading light, her face, once hardened, softened again, childlike, as she had been years ago. I gently replied, I once thought I had lost you, Chloe. But maybe it's through the cracks that the light finds its way in. A soft breeze swept by, carrying the scent of damp pine and roses from the porch. I closed my eyes, letting each breath sink deep into my chest, whispering as though to myself, as though to Dante far away, I lost my husband. But I didn't lose everything. I've kept our home. My daughter has found herself again, and a part of memory has been set right. Perhaps the truth is painful, but it is the only medicine for love and healing. In the distance, the lights inside the house flicked on, spilling warm yellow across the yard. I set my teacup down and smiled. The tangled knots that once seemed impossible to undo had loosened, leaving me with a quiet, a complete peace, as if everything had finally returned to where it belonged. Every family story carries its cracks, and sometimes its miracles of healing. After hearing this journey, I want to know your thoughts if it were you, standing between betrayal and the chance to mend. Would you choose forgiveness or letting go? Your voice could be encouragement, or a new perspective for us to reflect on together. Because sometimes the truth wounds us, yet it is also the doorway that lets love and understanding return. And I believe your reflections will help this community grow closer. A place where we all see pieces of ourselves in lives that seem distant yet feel so near. If you'd like to continue with us, please hit subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. It isn't just a number, it's the strength to keep telling stories of family, trust, and healing. Stories that speak to the heart. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening until the very end. You are the reason these stories are told, and your presence is what makes this journey meaningful.